next thing that we're going to talk about.
Why they are feeding levels, and why are they important to resource managers? They're important because it takes more energy and more biomass to make an organism at a higher level than it does to make one at a lower level. And this is, of course, important when it comes to feeding people. And a big thing looming on the horizon for all of us is that there'll be at least another 3 billion people, or 2.5 anyway, 2.5 billion people on the planet, and we're going to have to find a way to feed them. So it's important. Also, we've already talked about how there are more producers than consumers, because otherwise the consumers would eat everything and we wouldn't have anything left. So it's the same concept that 90% of the energy and biomass are lost at each level. It's lost in respiration, heat, and inefficient conversion. And biomass, we haven't talked about biomass yet, but it's the total mass of living organisms in a particular area. So if we had a room here, or the room you're sitting in, what is the total biomass of living organisms in that room? Let's say you're at home in your living room, and you think you're the only one, but there are surely microbes in the room, lots of microbes, not only within us, but also in the environment. And then perhaps you have mosquitoes flying around, or flies, or whatever else. And perhaps there's more than one person, so you'd have to count all the people that are there. You add up all the weights of all the different living organisms, and that's the total mass of living organisms in that area. Now, maybe you want it just for humans. If you just want the total mass of humans, you determine the mass of those, let's say, 3 people, and add that up. If you want the total biomass of a fish harvest, for example, you find out the mass of the tons of fish that were just harvested, and that's the biomass of those fish that are harvested. Okay, so biomass also changes with the different levels. It also loses about 90% and sometimes more at each level. So here is typical pyramid with on the x-axis you could have energy or biomass or the number of organisms, because the number of organisms will also decrease as you go up. You don't have as many predators as you do first order consumers, or as you do the herbivores, or as you do the herbs, the plants at the bottom. And one thing that bothers me a bit about all of these diagrams is that they're not to scale. So what's wrong with the scale here? Ask yourself that. What's wrong? So if you look at, if we're supposed to be losing 90%, well, the grasshopper box is larger than 10% of the grass, and it's wrong. It should be 10% or even smaller than the grass. And that doesn't just represent grasshoppers. Keep in mind that that represents all herbivores. All the vegetarians that eat grasses would be listed in there. Grasshopper is just an example. Likewise, the first order consumers, they should be 10% of the grasshopper level, and gosh, they're at least a third, and that's not correct. So I wish they would at least draw these to scale, but maybe that's difficult to do. Anyway, so the hawks would be just 10% of the first order herbivores. Yeah, so other than that, you can see how, going up each level, you'll have fewer organisms. And keep in mind that the ones that are listed here are just examples. It's not just hawks, but it's all predators at the very top, carnivores. Okay, so here we should see the biomass pyramid. Again, this one's not to scale because the carnivores at the top are, much more than the herbivore, than 10% of the herbivores, etc. But you can see the combined mass of all producers, or that of all herbivores or all carnivores, is going to be about 10% of the level below. So how do they relate to human nutrition, and why do the world's poor tend to eat low on the food chain? Now, if you go to a very poor country, usually meat costs a premium, and very few poor people can afford meat. And here we have the same number of calories. We've got corn on one side with 20,000 calories, or rice with 20,000 calories. and that 20,000 calories in India would feed 10 humans 200 calories each. But here in America, we feed a lot of the corn, over 2/3, I believe, over 2/3 of the corn is fed to a cow, and then we eat the cow or the cattle. So in that case, the cow, that feeds the cow 2,000 calories, and then we end up eating just 200. So this system on the left only feeds one human, where the system on the right feeds 10, the same number of calories. So it's more efficient for people to be vegetarians than it is to be carnivores. That just makes sense, because you can't have as many carnivores as you do herbivores. Let's see, on average, livestock produce 1 pound of meat for every 10 pounds of food we feed them. But some actually are much better than others. Here we see that cattle on average eat 16 pounds of food per pound of meat produced. So you have to feed them 16 pounds and you'll get 1 pound of meat out of that 16 pounds that you feed them. As you can see, pigs are much more efficient. They're about 9 pounds of food in for every pound out. Turkeys are better still. And then, of course, chickens and eggs are about 3 pounds for every pound of meat produced, or meat or eggs. And then you have fish, where they're getting even better than chickens. So many people feel like many vegetarians will eat fish because it's so efficient, but they won't eat chickens or any of these others listed here. Right now, we have enough food to feed 10 billion people on a vegetarian diet, but not a diet high in meat. The American diet is about 25% meat. That's very high, the highest in the world. The Italians eat about 15% of meat in their diet, and they live the longest life. They have the longest life expectancies. You may have heard of the Mediterranean diet. They tend to live longer and be healthier, and part of that longer life is eating a lot less meat and a lot of vegetables. And then you have the Indian diet, where they have a lower life expectancy and a very low level of meat. Some are strict vegetarians, of course, in India. So perhaps we want a better mix, more like the Mediterranean diet, for long lives. And a big thing here is that as incomes rise, people want more meat. The moment they get another dollar, they'll often spend that on meat. So we're going to have to produce a lot more meat in the coming years than we did in the past. And that's part of where maybe your work will come in, to help produce meat for the growing world.